welcome to Tech Latest from Nikkei Asia, where we bring you fresh updates from the Asian tech sector. I'm your host, Shotaro Tani, and in this week's episode, we dive into how more and more Filipinos are embracing e-wallets than conventional bank accounts. With me to discuss the topic is Ramon Royandoyan, our Manila correspondent. Ramon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. I think this is an interesting topic to discuss this week.
Certainly. So can you just explain why e-wallets have exploded in popularity in the country?
So I think we have to look back at the idea that cash used to be actually king, basically before COVID. So that's what's until 2019. And then when the pandemic happened, people were forced to stay indoors, and that influenced a lot of consumption and spending habits. Paying in cash basically meant that you were sort of transmitting the virus. I think that was sort of a norm across the world. So everyone was forced to adapt to using e-wallets. And the first e-wallet that sort of became popular and remains to be the most popular here is Gcash. Gcash has been around for, I think, more than a decade before the pandemic happened. So if you're going to go to malls, groceries, to buy anything, people were very cautious about using cash. So suddenly, okay, maybe I can use Gcash. I can use an e-wallet to pay. So when Gcash started that wave, many other companies followed suit. Many of the other players became more popular. And that also helped popularize the idea that, hey, maybe I can use digital banks. So for, I think, close to 2 years, 2020 until 2022, many people were accustomed basically to paying using their e-wallets. And that helped basically popularize e-wallets in the Philippines. If the pandemic didn't happen, I don't think the adoption of e-wallets in the Philippines would be as fast as what we saw, I think, during those years.
Right, interesting. What are some of the features that these e-wallets are offering that conventional banks don't?
Yeah, so I think that's a great question because they just started off as a payment platform that was simply just having that wallet, and you can cash in if you connect, let's say, your digital bank account. But if you're not as tech savvy or tech literate, you can actually go to these stores like, I don't know, convenience stores like 7-Eleven to cash in, and you'd pay them an extra maybe 5% of the actual amount you're using to cash in. But besides that, they've expanded now to remittances. You can actually do retail trading already, retail investments using Gcash, using not just Gcash, but the other e-wallet platforms. And you can also take out loans. You can use it to pay your bills. You can actually do online gaming with these e-wallets. And
well, how does that work? How does that work, Ramon?
Yeah, so that's interesting because before all of the regulation on the online gambling, online gaming sector happened, they have this sort of affiliate link at, if you use the Gcash or Maya, that you can click, and then they would just click that link and you would be redirected to basically those online gaming platforms. It was as easy as that. So I think that sort of helped another wave of online gambling in the Philippines. But I think that's another segment for this talk. But yeah, so that kind of accessibility, I think, opened up a lot of opportunities for businesses here in the Philippines.
So it's basically acting like a conventional bank, but it's just in the form of the e-wallet, basically.
Yeah, and I think what's fascinating is I think the Philippines is still considered a social media capital. So a lot of people here have smartphones, basically. So that sort of helped, I think, the adoption of the use of these e-wallets. Because without that, I think, again, the adoption will be much, much slower.
I'm wondering, is one of the pitches from these e-wallet companies that, because they can keep track of the daily transactions of the users, and because they have, vast amounts of data on that they can, maybe credit score a user much efficiently and much better compared to conventional banks. Is that one of their pitches?
That's an interesting question because the Philippines doesn't really have a proper credit scoring, what do you call that, mechanism, as opposed to other developed or even developing countries. So, let's say when you take out loans, it's still up to the bank, but it's very rudimentary. So I think part of their pitch is basically it's easy to use. from what I remember during the pandemic, it wasn't because you can take a log of your daily transactions. I think that was just part of it, but it's more for the convenience of paying without taking out your wallet, without using cash. I think that was a big part of the pitch, and basically not just big businesses but the smaller stores, you can pay using these e-wallets. And I think that was sort of the biggest pitch for these companies, that hey, everyone's using it, you should jump in. If I want to eat at the restaurant, I can pay using e-wallet. Because at a certain point, I remember some restaurants would not accept cash, they would just accept e-wallet payments. So I think that sort of sped up the whole idea of adoption and credibility on their part. But there's a dark side to it.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that later. But I'll just before we get to that point, I just wanted to ask you. You obviously mentioned Gcash, but
Yeah.
who are the actual main players in the industry, and are they backed by any like prominent conglomerates or tech companies in the region?
Yeah, so good point. It's not just Gcash. Maya is backed by Smart, and Smart is backed by PLDT, which is a subsidiary of First Metro Pacific, a holding company based in Hong Kong. So if I recall correctly, they own, I think, parts of Indomie. And there are other, what they call it, e-wallets here, but those are, I think, the smaller ones, because I think those e-wallets are also tied to digital banks. So GoTime here is a venture between Time and a local conglomerate. So that's one of the other players. And the other, what do you call that, digital banks that have e-wallets also are backed by basically other conglomerates here, like the Ayalas. And yeah, I think Robinsons also has that. So they have that kind of backing already to keep them in, playing in the market. But it's Gcash and Maya that's sort of having this head-to-head competition here in the Philippines.
Gotcha. And we'll, as mentioned, we'll get to the dark side of this whole boom in e-wallets. One of the things that you mentioned in your article was the case of online gaming operators, suspension of access to online gaming operators, and I think that came from the central bank. Can you just explain what happened there?
So before that policy came down, there were already studies and reports from people that online gambling was becoming a problem. Like, I think there was this viral post from this American vlogger, I think, who saw this jeepney driver playing online gambling. And then I think it just started there, that I saw lots of stories on social media that they were sort of blaming access to these online gaming platforms for their addiction. And I remember, as I did the reporting on the rise of online gambling in the Philippines. There was this recovery group for gamblers here that sort of said that it's so easy to get access to online gaming, to online gambling using Gcash, using Maya, that the government needed to step in. So when the central bank issued that, there was already pushback already that, hey, we need to do something. And even Congress, the Philippine Congress, has been launching investigations on how they could manage this wave of online gambling. Because basically, it used to be that gambling, you can just go to casinos. It was confined to that. But with online gambling, you can actually get addicted anywhere. You can be at home. You can even just spend a peso, and it just starts with a peso, and people, you'd start racking up debt. Basically, there's this, what you call that, subreddit for Philippine Gamblers Anonymous, talking about their whole experience about it, and many of them blame easy access. So I think that's part of the policy that the central bank said, hey, you have to do something. So the e-wallet said, okay, we're going to comply with the policy that was set forth by the Philippine Central Bank.
And so, have the links to these online gaming portals on e-wallets, have they disappeared now? Are they still there? Or
Well, last I checked, they were disappeared. They were on the way to disappearing, because before it didn't have KYC policies, and now I think if you do that, they would steadily warn you that, hey, you can't access this now. So you'd have to find, if you're addicted to online gambling, basically, you'd have to find other ways to access these platforms, especially the licensed ones.
Gotcha. We recently, had Dylan Lowe, who's our colleague in Singapore, and he came and recently talked about how Singapore's digital banks are struggling in the city-state. But that's obviously, contrasts dramatically to what's happening in the Philippines. I mean, what do you think is the main difference between the success of e-wallets in the Philippines and the struggles of digital banks in Singapore?
It's fascinating because I think it's the financial literacy in a way, but maybe it's because of funding or even push for these digital banks to become more popular. Because I think here you can say that their success, but I would even describe that as maybe a relative kind of success because many people are still cautious about using e-wallets, using these digital banks because there are, I think, as I was alluding to earlier, I think the dark side to it is there has been issues in past years that there was breaches, data breaches, hacks. People have lost their money. So I think that's sort of having an impact on adoption. But still, I think it's really fast here because mainly, I think compared to Singapore, Filipinos during the pandemic, Filipinos were suddenly got that option that hey, we can actually use these kinds of platforms. I mean, that's how I'm looking at it. And maybe compared to what Singapore has seen, maybe there must be a surplus of these digital banks. And what do I actually choose? But yeah,
And I guess there's an element of Singapore being quite a well banked society, whereas Philippines is mostly underbanked or
yeah,
unbanked,
yeah.
right?
I agree because when you think about it, before this e-wallets came, before these digital banks came, most Filipinos really didn't want to open bank accounts. There's a lot of reasons to that, mainly geographical proximity if you're living in one of the islands, or basically just confidence in the financial institution that hey, should I open in that institution, even if I don't understand what financial literacy is, and they require lots of what they call that IDs. And when you open with these digital banks, these e-wallets, they only require one ID. I think that sort of helped the adoption. That you don't need to, they call have these lots of documents when you go to a bank and to show proof that you have income. Now you can just show what your driver's license, your passport, your postal ID, and get a scan through these apps, and you're a verified user in less than what 10 minutes.
Wow, no, that's super interesting, and I'm sure you'll write many more stories on this topic going forward. So thank you for coming on the show, Ramon.
Thanks for this.
That's it for this week's episode. You can read Ramon's piece on Filipino e-wallets as well as the latest Asian tech news on our website, asia.nikkei.com. You can also subscribe to our weekly Tech Asia newsletter, which will be delivered to your inbox every Thursday. Thank you for tuning in and see you in our next episode.